It was a late spring evening in 1981, the kind of evening where the sun lingers low over the horizon, stretching the shadows across the highway and making every overpass and grove of trees seem alive with movement. I had just finished visiting my parents in Van Nuys, California, and the drive back to San Francisco should have been simple, a familiar route I'd taken dozens of times before. Nothing more than a long stretch of asphalt, occasional trucks, and the quiet hum of my old Honda. But that night felt different from the moment I pulled out of my parents' driveway. The air was unusually crisp, almost biting, and there was an odd stillness in the hills that I hadn't noticed before. About an hour into the drive, I passed through a familiar truck stop called Grapevine. It was the usual mix of long-haul trucks, neon signs, and the faint aroma of fast food lingering in the parking lot. I wasn't planning to stop. I had a schedule to keep, aiming to get back to Haight-Ashbury before midnight. But as I was leaving, I saw him, a young hitchhiker standing by the roadside, thumb extended, hoping for a ride. He looked unremarkable at first glance, skinny, red-haired, wearing a faded denim jacket and sneakers scuffed beyond repair. But there was something in his posture that caught my attention, a kind of nervous urgency, like he had been standing there for hours and might not survive the night on his own. For reasons I can't explain even now, something about him stirred a mix of sympathy and curiosity in me. Maybe it was the memory of my own late nights in high school, waiting for someone to offer me a lift. Despite every warning in my head, every horror story about hitchhikers gone wrong, I slowed the car and pulled over. "Hey, need a ride?" I called out, trying to sound casual. He ran up to the passenger side, relief washing over his face. "Yes, that would be amazing," he said. He introduced himself as Ronald, a UCLA history student heading home to Tracy for spring break. His voice was nervous but polite, with an almost rehearsed eagerness that I found a little odd. He asked questions about my journey, and I, perhaps foolishly, answered with a casual openness. We fell into a conversation about school, history, and the usual small talk people make to pass the time. Ronald seemed particularly keen on discussing World War II. Not the kind of conversation I expected from a young man of his age, but I indulged him. At first, it was harmless, almost interesting. He spoke about battles, strategies, and historical figures with an unusual depth for someone barely out of high school. But soon his fascination took a darker turn. He began recounting atrocities with a giddy intensity, describing massacres, beheadings, and executions in unsettling detail. It wasn't the facts themselves that frightened me. It was the way he relished them, smiling as he spoke about death and suffering as though it were entertainment. As we drove further, I noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He would suddenly lean in close, pointing out details on the map that didn't exist, or muttering under his breath about what it must have been like to wield a sword or to witness it firsthand. At one point, he casually mentioned that he had stolen snacks and sodas from various stores along the highway, laughing as if it were a harmless prank. I tried to keep the conversation light, asking him about school, hoping to distract him from the darker stories he kept diving into. Then, without warning, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a revolver. My stomach dropped. It was real, loaded, cold metal that gleamed under the dashboard lights. My heart raced as I struggled to stay calm, forcing myself to maintain a casual tone, hoping to keep him from acting impulsively. "I just want to show you," he said, almost apologetically. "I'm not dangerous. It's just for fun." For a moment I believed him, clinging desperately to any rational explanation. But the gleam in his eyes told a different story. He lit a cigarette, not ordinary tobacco, but something far stronger. Something that made him twitch, laugh uncontrollably, and mutter nonsense about courage, chance, and fate. He proposed playing Russian roulette, mimicking scenes from The Deer Hunter. Laughing as he described the scenario, my mind spun with panic. If I moved too quickly, if I said the wrong thing, I could be dead in an instant. I realized my only hope was to manipulate him, keep him calm, and wait for an opportunity. When he reached into his backpack for a drink, I slammed on the brakes suddenly, causing the bag to spill its contents, sodas, snacks, papers, all across the floor. For a brief moment he was distracted, giving me a narrow window. I suggested stopping at a rest area, claiming we needed to replace the spilled items, and he surprisingly agreed. Every mile of the drive was a balancing act between keeping him entertained, pretending to be calm, and plotting my escape. At the rest area, I convinced him that he should go inside to buy replacement snacks. As he stepped out, I kept my hands on the wheel, my entire body tense, heart hammering. I watched him walk toward the convenience store, glancing back once to make sure I was still there. Then I started the engine and drove off, my adrenaline-fueled reflexes keeping me from looking back. Every shadow, every noise seemed like a threat as I sped down the highway, aware that even a small mistake could have fatal consequences. By the time I reached the city, exhaustion, relief, and lingering terror washed over me. The encounter had left a permanent scar on my perception of strangers and the roads I once felt safe traveling. I never saw Ronald again. The memory of his wide-eyed grin, the cold weight of the revolver, and the manic laughter stayed with me for years. A chilling reminder that sometimes danger hides in the most ordinary circumstances. The highway had become a place of caution, a reminder that even simple acts of kindness, stopping for a hitchhiker, could turn into a nightmare in a single moment. From that night onward, I never picked up strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed, and I learned a hard truth. The world is far more unpredictable and frightening than most of us realize. Story 2. The Fake Cop and the Bullet. It was a bitterly cold night in Birmingham, England, sometime in early 1983. The streets were mostly empty, except for the occasional passing car and the faint glow of streetlights that struggled to illuminate the wet asphalt. My dad, a quiet man with a love for music, computers, and all things meticulous, was driving home after a part-time DJ gig at a small hall in West Brom. The work itself was straightforward, setting up his turntables, spinning tracks, ensuring the crowd was engaged. But the timing always left him exhausted. Nights like this meant driving late, sometimes past midnight, and the long, lonely roads had a way of sharpening the senses in ways most people wouldn't understand. He had been DJing for a few weeks, and while he enjoyed the work, the late-night drives often left him uneasy. There's a certain tension in being alone on the road when the world is asleep, a subtle awareness of every shadow, every distant sound. That night the air was still, almost unnaturally so, carrying an eerie quiet over the deserted streets. Even the familiar bends and turns of Kenrick Way seemed more sinister than usual. Each dark patch of road a potential threat. My dad had always trusted his instincts, and something deep inside told him that this drive might not be as routine as any other. As he navigated past the roundabout, a flash of blue light caught his eye in the rearview mirror. Motorbike police weren't uncommon in Birmingham, though most patrolled the motorways rather than side streets. His first instinct was to comply, pull over, wait politely, and see why he had been stopped. He slowed the car and moved to the side of the road, shutting off the engine, expecting a standard traffic stop. The figure on the motorbike approached, but the closer he got, the more off everything seemed. The jacket wasn't standard issue. The helmet gleamed too brightly, almost theatrical, and his footwear, white sneakers, certainly wasn't part of any police uniform. There were no badges, no insignias, nothing to mark him as an officer. My dad's stomach knotted. Instinct screamed that this wasn't right. Something in the way the man moved, deliberate but oddly casual, sent a chill down his spine. And then, almost like a nightmare confirming itself, the figure reached into his jacket pocket. A metallic glint appeared, unmistakably the barrel of a handgun. My dad froze for a fraction of a second, but his instincts propelled him into action. He reached for the keys, started the engine, and floored the accelerator. The night erupted into chaos. The first shot shattered the quiet. Glass sprayed across the driver's side, piercing the windshield and embedding shards dangerously close. My dad felt a sharp sting in his shoulder, the pain immediate and blinding. Heart hammering, adrenaline surging, he swerved instinctively, desperate to escape. Another shot rang out. He ducked low, hands gripping the wheel, eyes darting for any safe route. The streets twisted beneath him, the familiar turns of Kenrick Way now treacherous and alien. Blood seeped from his shoulder, sticky and warm, mingling with the grime on his coat. Fear took over in waves. nausea and terror colliding as he realized that one wrong turn, one misstep, could be fatal. Somewhere between the roundabout and Hawthorne's, he made a desperate decision. He would flag down any passing car, beg for help, and hope that someone was awake, alert, and willing to stop. Every second felt drawn out, each streetlight a distant hope or a looming threat. Eventually, a vehicle appeared, headlights cutting through the night, and he waved frantically. Relief surged when the driver stopped, and within minutes, he was on his way to Sandwell Hospital, the pain in his shoulder now a burning, constant reminder of how close he had come to death. At the hospital, the reality of the attack began to sink in. Surgery was immediate. The bullet had grazed dangerously close to major arteries and vital tissue. My dad's life hung by a thread, and every question from the police underscored how precarious his survival had been. The officers were thorough, pressing for details, asking whether he had enemies, whether any recent interactions might have provoked such a violent response. My dad answered honestly. He was a nerdy, quiet man, a lover of music and computers, not someone who dabbled in gangs or criminal activity. The police seemed skeptical, as if survival alone required justification. It was only after several days of questioning and reflection that the truth began to emerge. The man who had shot at my dad was likely a Yardie, part of a notorious Jamaican gang operating in Birmingham. Yardies, as my dad later learned, were violent, calculating, and deeply tied to both Jamaican and local gang culture. They arrived in the UK in waves, starting in the late 70s and early 80s, seeking better opportunities but often bringing with them the brutal, territorial tendencies of their homeland. While some were law-abiding, others quickly established dominance through fear, intimidation, and lethal enforcement of perceived slights. My dad realized, in those harrowing moments of reflection, that the incident was not just random. It had likely begun hours earlier at the DJ gig, where a small confrontation over a music request had occurred. Someone had felt disrespected, their ego bruised by a simple refusal, and decided that retribution would be immediate and violent. The fact that he survived was a combination of luck, instinct, and perhaps divine intervention. Weeks turned into months, and life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. My dad could drive again, though the memory of the bullet tearing through his shoulder haunted him for years. He remained cautious, always aware of his surroundings, and for a long time avoided the West Brom area entirely. Yet the incident left more than just physical scars. It instilled a permanent awareness of life's fragility, the randomness of violence, and the terrifying reality that even the most mundane routines could turn deadly in an instant. Even decades later, the memory lingered. Family conversations sometimes drifted back to that night. The fear, the adrenaline, the impossible luck that had saved him. My sister, not yet born at the time, had her very existence tied to the precise trajectory of that bullet. And while my dad eventually healed, the lesson remained etched into our family's consciousness. Life is unpredictable, and danger can come from the most unexpected of places. A routine drive home could, in moments, become the fight for survival. A chilling reminder that the line between normalcy and nightmare is thinner than we ever realize. Story 3. The night in Shreveport. It was 2009. A year that seemed ordinary at first glance, but for me, it marked one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I had been working at a Prohibition-era style cocktail bar in Shreveport, Louisiana, a sort of speakeasy hidden behind a nondescript storefront. The job itself was a dream for anyone who loved the aesthetic of the 1920s, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the artistry of perfectly crafted cocktails. But the schedule was brutal. Nights started late and we rarely closed before 3:30 a.m., meaning that the drive home was always long, dark, and dangerous. The streets were nearly empty at that hour, and the faint glow of streetlights cast eerie shadows across the asphalt, giving life to the imagination's worst nightmares. That night, I had finished my shift around 3 a.m., exhausted but content with the work I had done. The bar was quiet now, the patrons long gone, leaving only the faint scent of bitters and lemon zest lingering in the air. I locked up and walked to my car, a small sedan that had been my companion for years. The streets were wet from an earlier drizzle, and the lights reflected off the slick pavement in distorted shifting patterns. As I drove down West Chevaport, my headlights cutting through the darkness, I felt that familiar tension settle over me, the kind of gut instinct that tells you something is off, even when nothing seems wrong. A mile into my drive, something caught my attention. Out of nowhere, a figure was lying in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a homeless person or someone who had simply passed out, but as I slowed down and peered through my windshield, the horror set in. The figure wasn't moving naturally. The arms were splayed unnaturally, legs stretched awkwardly, and the eyes were wide open in a frozen stare that made my stomach churn. My first thought was to help, to pull over and make sure the person was alive, but instinct screamed at me to be cautious. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As I reached for my door handle, ready to step out, a sudden chilling sensation ran down my spine. It was almost like a tap on my shoulder, an unseen warning. My eyes darted to the woods on the left side of the road, dense trees lining the park area, the shadows stretching unnaturally long in the faint glow of the streetlights. And that's when I saw them. Two figures, faces obscured, creeping through the trees with calculated movements, eyes locked on me and my car. My heart leapt into my throat. This wasn't a random accident. This was an ambush. I realized in a gut-wrenching instant that I was about to be carjacked. I slammed the door shut and hit the gas, tires squealing as the adrenaline surged through me. The man lying in the street who moments ago seemed harmless, now jumped up and lunged at my door handle. The chaos of the moment was surreal. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my foot buried in the accelerator, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the threat. Every turn of the road was a calculation of survival, every shadow a potential attacker. The drive was a blur of fear and instinct. My mind raced, assessing every possible outcome, trying to anticipate what these attackers might do next. Would they have a weapon? Were they willing to kill? My pulse thundered in my ears, matching the rhythm of the tires against the wet asphalt. I dared not look over my shoulder more than a fraction of a second. But every fleeting glimpse confirmed my worst fears. The figures were moving with predatory intent, following, calculating, closing in. By sheer luck, my familiarity with the streets of Shreveport became my salvation. I knew every turn, every side street, every alleyway that could offer a temporary reprieve or a chance to shake them off. I weaved through the streets, praying for a car, a witness, anything that could break the relentless pursuit. Somewhere between West Chevaport and the outskirts near Forest Park, I spotted movement again in the shadows. The attackers were coordinating, attempting to cut off my escape. My stomach turned cold. If I had been a second slower, if I had hesitated even slightly, the outcome could have been fatal. The man who had initially appeared to be lying helplessly on the road, the one I had considered helping, had been part of the trap all along. His sudden agility and the timing of his movements made it clear that this had been planned meticulously. My fear escalated, transforming into sheer terror. The night, which had started as another routine drive home, had become a test of every instinct I possessed, every ounce of skill and cunning I had accumulated over years of navigating both the roads and the perils of human unpredictability. I reached the intersection near Joella, a familiar strip mall that during the day was bustling with life but now stood eerily silent. I considered stopping, calling for help, but instinct told me that any pause could be fatal. The attackers had the element of surprise, and stopping would give them the upper hand. My only option was to continue driving, weaving through the darkened streets, hoping that the shadows and streetlights would not betray me. The seconds stretched into eternities, each moment a battle between panic and strategic thinking. I realized that the attackers were not only physically adept, but psychologically manipulative, using the initial sight of the unconscious man to disarm my caution. My mind replayed every horror story I had ever heard, every news segment about ambushes, carjackings, and violent crimes. And yet, amidst the fear, a strange clarity emerged. I had to survive. I had to stay calm. Every movement, every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Somewhere along the Forest Park stretch, the attackers seemed to falter. momentarily disoriented by my sudden acceleration and evasive maneuvers. I used this window to my advantage, doubling back through a side street that led to more familiar territory. The adrenaline coursed through me, fueling both fear and ingenuity. My headlights cut swaths through the darkness, revealing the occasional glint of their eyes. But they were now forced to navigate the unfamiliar terrain, giving me a fleeting but critical advantage. Eventually, after what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, I reached a well-lit, populated area. The comfort of streetlights, the distant hum of a late-night diner, and the occasional passing car offered a temporary reprieve. My hands trembled as I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, the fluorescent lights harsh and blinding after the dark chase. I sat in the car for a long time, heart racing, chest heaving, trying to process what had just happened. The attackers had vanished, leaving me shaken but alive. The aftermath was both relief and disbelief. I replayed every detail, every near miss, every shadow that had loomed too close. My rational mind struggled to reconcile the terror of the night with the mundane reality of arriving home safely. For weeks afterward, I would drive cautiously, checking mirrors obsessively, feeling the lingering presence of that night's danger in every shadow and streetlight. The experience left an indelible mark. It was a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary life could devolve into chaos, how trust and instinct must coexist, and how, sometimes, survival depends on nothing more than quick thinking, luck, and a primal understanding of fear. I never saw the attackers again, never understood their motives fully, but the memory remained vivid, a terrifying lesson etched into my consciousness about the thin line between routine and peril, between life and death. Even now, years later, whenever I drive late at night, I feel the echo of that fear, a reminder that some nights are more dangerous than they appear, that some threats are hidden in plain sight, and that survival is sometimes just a matter of seconds, instinct, and sheer willpower. Story 4, the late-night taco truck horror. It started as one of those nights where everything seems normal, mundane even, but beneath the surface, something ominous is quietly waiting to emerge. I was working nights at a small bar on the outskirts of Arizona, in a town so remote that the word quiet doesn't even begin to describe it. The job itself was easy, probably the easiest I had ever done. But the long drive to and from work every night was grueling, 1.5 hours each way, through stretches of desert where the only movement came from the occasional coyote or the faint glow of a distant truck's headlights. It was during these drives that I began to develop a heightened awareness, a constant tension that made every shadow and flicker of movement feel like a potential threat. The nights passed slowly, but routine became comforting. One thing that had broken up the monotony of these endless drives was a small taco truck parked near the Copper Sands RV park. At first, I only noticed it in passing, a dot of light and activity in an otherwise desolate stretch of road. The smell of grilled meat, charred peppers, and fresh tortillas reached my car before I even saw the truck. One night, hunger got the better of me and I decided to stop. That single decision would mark the beginning of a recurring habit that I didn't realize would save my life one night, yet also bring me face to face with something truly terrifying. The Taco Man, if you could call him that, was a quiet, older fellow who always greeted customers with a nod and a polite smile. He had a way of making people feel at ease, a rare quality in such a desolate area. His truck was not fancy, a large, faded vehicle with the paint peeling in places, but it exuded a sense of care and pride. Every night I stopped, I'd watch him grill and serve with precision. I never asked for his name and he never asked mine. We were two strangers bound by the simple ritual of food and human connection in the middle of the night. Over time, this became routine. Night after night, I'd stop for a taco, chat briefly, and continue home. One night, however, the ordinary became extraordinary, and fear crept into the edges of my consciousness. I pulled into my usual spot, the truck illuminated by a single, harsh overhead light. I called out to the Taco Man as I approached, but there was no response. The usual smell of sizzling meat was absent, replaced by an acrid chemical stench that immediately set my nerves on edge. I stepped closer, peering into the darkness, and that's when I noticed the smoke. A thin, curling wisp rising from the grill. Something was burning, But it wasn't the food. As I climbed the retractable stairs to the truck's entrance, the air grew thick and heavy, almost suffocating. My heart pounded and a creeping sense of dread filled me. I opened the door and froze. The scene inside was chaotic, surreal, and horrifying. The cash register was open, drawers overturned, coins scattered across the floor. At first I thought it was a robbery, but the absence of a violent struggle puzzled me. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no blood on the floor, only a sense of absence and unnatural stillness. Then I saw it. The outline on the grill, a perfect jet-black silhouette of a human hand, charred into the metal surface, burned in a way that could only mean one thing. Someone had been here, alive, and the fire had left an indelible mark. My stomach churned, bile rising as I tried to make sense of it. My instincts screamed at me to get out, call the authorities, do anything. But my curiosity and loyalty to the taco man rooted me in place. The smell of burning flesh, faint but unmistakable, filled the small space, and I realized with horror that this was no ordinary robbery gone wrong. This was something far more sinister. I backed out of the truck, fumbling for my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The silence of the surrounding RV park was deafening. Not a single light flickered in the trailers nearby. Not a sound disturbed the otherwise perfect quiet of the night. I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I reported the scene, trying to convey the urgency without hysteria. But the dispatcher's calm voice did little to soothe the terror gripping me. Deputies were on the way, I was told, but I knew it would take them time to arrive. In the meantime, I was alone, standing in the cold desert air, with the eerie glow of the taco truck behind me. As I waited, I noticed something else. A faint movement near the edges of the RV park. Shadows shifting, too deliberate to be natural. My pulse quickened again. The realization hit me that whoever had done this might still be nearby, watching, waiting. I considered hiding, driving away, anything to escape, but my mind kept returning to the taco man. If he had been harmed, I couldn't just leave. I couldn't abandon him. That thought kept me rooted, trembling and alert, every nerve on edge. The deputies arrived eventually, their flashing lights cutting through the night like beacons. They took my statement, inspected the truck, and assured me that an investigation would follow. But the sense of fear didn't dissipate. Even after they left, after I returned home and tried to sleep, the image of that burned hand on the grill haunted me. The memory replayed in my dreams, a vivid reminder that ordinary routines can be shattered in an instant, and that the world often hides horrors just beneath the surface of the familiar. Weeks later, I tried to return to the taco truck, hoping against hope that the man had survived, that the event had been some terrible accident. But the truck was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving no explanation, no closure. The RV park was empty, the streets silent, and the sense of foreboding lingered like a shadow I could not shake. I never discovered what truly happened that night, who was responsible or why. The mystery remained, unresolved, a permanent scar in my memory. That night, more than any other, taught me the fragile nature of security and the thin line between normalcy and terror. The taco truck had been a small anchor in the chaos of my nights, a symbol of routine and comfort, and its sudden disappearance, along with the horrifying scene left behind, served as a chilling reminder that danger often lurks in the most ordinary places. Survival, I realized, isn't just about quick reflexes or luck. Sometimes it's about being present, aware, and ready to confront the unknown, no matter how terrifying it may be, even now. Years later, whenever I drive those roads, I cannot help but glance at the spots where the taco truck once stood, always wondering what really happened that night. The silence of the desert, the empty trailers, the absence of life in those dark stretches, all serve as a reminder that terror can strike anywhere, and that the line between safety and danger is often thinner than we dare to imagine. All four stories show one terrifying truth: danger often hides in plain sight. From hitchhikers to empty streets, quiet towns, and late-night encounters, the ordinary can turn deadly in an instant. Survival isn't just luck, it's awareness, instinct, and courage under pressure. So next time you drive alone, stay alert. The highway never truly sleeps, and neither do its hidden horrors.